Okay, fine. So before we move to this, I discovered just this morning, I've been reading Rav Ronen Neuer's book on halachic process, the narrow halachic bridge, and I discovered that another hybrid of some of the positions that we saw in terms of why the Gemara is binding. So I'll just mention it for you, and if you want the translation of Rav Kook, then ask me later. Rice Spar is working on a translation of this book by Rav Kook, so he shared the English with me for me to share with you. No passing on beyond that, but he has a translation of it, so you don't have to try to parse through Rav Kook's Hebrew, which, trust me, is difficult. But Rav Kook, like the Rambam, Kanireh, Kesef Mishnah, Udi Imei, says, why is it the Gemara is binding? Remind me. Right? Why do we accept the Gemara? Because we did, right? Kabbalah, we did, right? Kabbalah Ummah. We accepted, and we already saw that Rav Kook said that, right? But what I didn't see, because this is not in any of the pieces that I showed you by Rav Kook, but it's in his Sefer L'Nevuchei Hador. So in the Nevuchei Hador Perek Yud Gimel, he adds a caveat to that, which we mentioned the possibility, but I didn't have a name. Now I have a name, which is if it's about Kabbalah, if it's about accepting it, so then that acceptance might run out at some point. Meaning we might have only temporarily accepted it, i.e. until we have a Sanhedrin again. That is indeed Rav Kook's position, right? Not like the Dor Revi, right? We saw the Dor Revi who said that when Mashiach comes, the Gemara won't be binding, but that's because he said that it was temporarily transformed from Torah Sheba'al Peh to Torah Shebachtav, and then eventually we'll bring it back, right? But the simpler way of saying that is simply the reason the Gemara is binding is because we accepted it, and we only accepted it temporarily for stability purposes. And once Mashiach comes, we don't need that because we'll have a Sanhedrin, and therefore the Gemara won't be binding. Chatzim and Talmud was a temporary phenomenon. So that's actually Rav Kook's position, right? He combines those two things to say that once Mashiach comes, then we'll move back, but we will stop having accepted. We will no longer accept the Bavli as binding. Yes, Ezra.
So it's like if you say how like is accepted like the neder or something like that?
Something like that.
So like even the stuff that's like wrong, stuff like stuff.
Well, that was
bad signs stuff to follow.
No, it's not. That's the Dor Revi's, right? The Dor Revi's extension of this is that not only do we accept it, we accept it even when it's wrong. Until then, you don't have to say that, right? Meaning, what? Meaning you could have theoretically said we accepted the halachic statements, but not the scientific. Are you talking about scientific? You're talking about science, right?
Well, yeah. But,
I mean, the Dor Revi says that we accept it even when they're scientifically wrong, right? Which you don't have to accept, right? You could argue that we accept the Gemara when it's, right, we accept the Gemara's halacha, but not necessarily statements of reality, and therefore we accept the halachic principle, right? Like in the lice case, right? You could say we accept the principle that you're not allowed to kill anything on Shabbos that procreates, right? They thought that lice didn't procreate; they spontaneously generated. They were wrong, and therefore the same principle leads to a different halacha. But we're accepting the halacha principle of the Gemara, but not the reality of the Gemara, right? You can say that. Many people do say that, but the Dor Revi in Achanami does not accept that.
It's from like your own opinions, like or let's say your own. Let's say you think that the halacha is A, but
no. So that pretty much everyone.
The Bali has a more opinion. So
no. So for sure the right, for all the reasons we went through, on halachic grounds, everyone says we accept the Bavli. The question of whether we accept the reality statements of the Gemara is a different story.
We're just looking at there, have to make a neder to not keep something that you think is true.
Yeah, that's why this is complicated, right? Meaning, I don't know if he thinks it's a regular neder, right? He has this idea of Kabbalah Ummah. Again, I can give you the original in the Hebrew of Rav Kook, and you can work through it. I have trouble with Rav Kook under the best of circumstances. Look, if you're Rav Kook and you're a super genius and you decide that you're going to write your personal diary to yourself in abstruse, Hegelian, mystical, highfalutin Hebrew, and then decide to publish it, so not everyone will understand you. Some people do. The Sklar claims that he does. That's why he translates. Rav Kook. I sometimes am a little bit lost in Rav Kook. I try. I try. Some of the things I understand more than others, but I can give it to you. It is a chapter in Ziring-Yerusha. It was not impossible to read. I can't promise you I understood it. But that's why, I asked Rav Ashi, I'm like, do we have an English copy for people? He's like, Roy Sklar is writing one. I'm like, is he? Well, that's wonderful. Then I can ask him if he can explain this chapter to you. But it is in the Ziring-Yerusha. Okay, let's close this parenthetical statement and go back to our sugya. So what we left off with was what we noted was seemingly Tosfot and definitely Pinchas-Chinuch's read of the Gemara in Erochin, which was that the Gemara, both in the case of Shteach Chuzah and in the case of an Eved, sets up two paradigms, right? There's Yoresh, and then there's the person himself, because we don't allow the Eved to serve an Acher, right? But we do himself. But that is contrasted with Yoresh. And in that context, Gemara distinguishes between Ben, who is not considered somebody else, and every other Yoresh who is merely a Yoresh and not the guy himself. Both sugyas, the Eved Ivri sugya, and then the same exact phenomenon comes up in Shteach Chuzah, right? The ancestral land case.
Right, but in the ancestral land case, you use the word ish.
Right, ish v'lo acher, meaning the conceptual model is him, but not somebody else, right? It's acher, right? Meaning it's not somebody else. And again, the Gemara says, so in that context, the Gemara explicitly asks, what about a bat? Right? Bat ma'u shetamid aviyah. So we noted that the simple understanding of that is that the Gemara is bringing this to the fore, which is, okay, when a son inherits, he inherits by doing something that other Yorshim don't, and that's why that reflects something about his status in general, that he's not an Acher, he's not somebody else, he's Mamali Mekomo, everything we talked about. And then the Gemara says, well, but what about daughter? We said the simplest way of understanding that conceptually is that the Gemara is asking this question. Yes, son has precedence over daughter, but does that mean son becomes before daughter, but when daughter inherits, she is Mamali Mikoma, or no, the fact that son comes before daughter proves that a daughter is just another Yoresh. We noted that the Gemara's conclusion is not 100% clear, because the Gemara does say that b'makom ben ki acher dumya, which is a very ambiguous phrase, right? Which is, when there is a son, she is like somebody else, which you can either take as a universal rule, which is that a daughter is always somebody else, right? Or very narrowly, which is to say, if there are sons alive and therefore she won't inherit, she is not the most Mamale Mikamo she could possibly be, and therefore she can't redeem it. But theoretically, in a world where there were no sons, if the daughter would redeem the land, it would go back to her father, right? Meaning it's only the presence of a son that makes her an Acher, right? Which is a very, very nuanced position, which is when she inherits because she's the exclusive progeny, then she is in fact Mamale Mikoma. However, we noted that the Pinchas-Chinuch explicitly says that's not true. That the conclusion of the Gemara is that even when there are sons, where there's no sons alive, the daughter is still considered an Acher and therefore cannot fulfill her father's place for the purpose of Shteach Chuzah. Right? Thereby very conclusively saying that the inheritance of daughter, even when it happens, is just that of another Yoresh. We noted that Tosfot seems to say that as well, but theoretically, that's not necessarily the case. Right? That was what we left off with. To highlight this, I want to go back to the sugya of Eved. Because in the sugya of Eved, why did we assume conceptually that a ben is considered a mamale mikoma and not a bat? Because the Gemara says that only a ben can continue the legacy of the father such that the slave has to serve him. Everyone else is an acher. That's the simple understanding of Gemara. That's our girsa in the Gemara. Yeah, I mean, these are all, right, in conversation. Though Yud, the Gemara said you can't prove anything, because the reason that a daughter can't fulfill Yud is not because she doesn't fulfill her place, because she's female.
Right, and in our previous, when we were talking about Jewish for sons, previously we said that better than I think a brother for 2 reasons, because it's Yid and ancestral land.
Correct. And then the Gemara tries to use that for daughter, but daughter that doesn't help because Yibum, the daughter, is equivalent to son, and Yid proves nothing because she can't marry the woman because she's a woman.
If Yid proves nothing, then neither does ancestral land, because ancestral land is dependent on Yibum.
Exactly. Right. Meaning ancestral land is dependent on Yibum. That's what. Exactly. That's exactly what the Gemara says, and that's why the Gemara explicitly asks, well, what about a daughter? Meaning all those proofs don't help you. Right? The Gemara has to explicitly raise the question, and that's why we said that when the Gemara explicitly raises the question, right, it seems to be posing exactly this question, which is when a daughter inherits, is she memali mekomah just like by Yibum? Right? And again, the answer of the Gemara is ambiguous, right? Because the Gemara does say a daughter is an acher, but the Gemara says she's an acher b'makom ben, which you can either read broadly, which is because a son comes first, that proves that only a son is memali mekomah, and not memali mekomo and not a daughter, or you could say, no, if there is a son alive, since he displaces the daughter, she now is no longer the memali mekomo. But that doesn't necessarily tell you that when there are no sons, she's not. Right? And again, the Pinchas-R.J very conclusively says that a daughter is always an acher, because he thinks even if there are no sons alive, she can't redeem the sadeh. Right? So the Pinchas-R.J is very clear that the Gemara's answer is a universal statement that a daughter takes a different place than a son. But this is something we have to be careful about, which is, sure, that's our Gemara and that's our Girsa, but if you have a slight difference interpretation or Girsa in the Gemara, then this all might be turned on its head. And that's what you find in this Machloket Rishonim in Kiddushin Yud Zayin. So the Gemara in Kiddushin Yud Zayin says as follows: V'im Tomar, Amai ino ovedet abat, Benu bat ki adodin minhu. Right? We'd ask, why doesn't the servant serve the daughter? In the context of Yibum, aren't sons and daughters equivalent? Right? K'di'ita b'reish perek yishmel. Umay kurve deben mi bat came in Yibum benu bat adodin minhu linyanachol nami ki adodin minhu. Right? And the Gemara had said, well, by Yibum we know sons and daughters are equivalent, so shouldn't that prove something for the purposes of Nachalah? So the Gemara says, so the Rashba quotes the Gemara, or paraphrases the Gemara, Yesh lomar, avdecha mashma, lecha v'lo la'acher. You, and not anybody else. Kol shu acher b'makom ben, anyone who would be an acher, when in the context of a son, ubat nami b'makom ben, l'nachala acharhu. And a daughter compared to a son is somebody else. Umehai taima nami udamrin be'erochen be'erochen magdishin sheina bat ma'amedet ste'achuz alavia. And that's why we say that a daughter does not stand in her father's place for the purpose of the ancestral field. Keva the chevan de legabe nachla bat legabe acher ben gachar damil and ste'achuz anali gachar damil. Right? And the Rashba summarizes with the simplest shot in our Gemaras, I think. Right? Which is all of these data points point in the direction that a daughter is considered an acher. She's an acher for Nachalah, she's an acher for, and therefore she's an acher for Evet Ivri, and she's an acher for Ste'achuza. But she's not an acher for Yibam, correct? Right? And that was what we dealt with 2 or 3 shiurim ago, which is why not? So there, the standard seems to be different, right? Because there it's more expansive. All we need, as the way the term Shmima in reverse said it, is all we need is anybody who will make it that it's Lo Yimachesh Shemo B'Yisrael, that he's not blotted out. Right? A daughter is an acher, but she's still not. But she still makes it that he's not blotted out. Right? Meaning, so she's.
Isn't the whole point of inheriting ancestral land, or not inheriting, but like so that they don't get blotted out, I guess. So like that's. Well,
no. Because the redemption of the ste'achuza needs a higher standard. Right? Needs him to redeem it. Him and someone who's considered him. Right? A daughter could not be considered him and still carry on his legacy enough that he's not blotted out. Right, that's how the Church Mima in reverse take it. Is that what you learn from this is that having a daughter means that your memory is not erased from existence, but it's not enough. Okay, but it's not enough for, right? Meaning, but it's not enough to be considered you. It's enough for you to not be somebody, right? I mean, it's enough for you to not be somebody else.
Right.
But no. Take that back. It's enough that you're not considered Exactly, right? Meaning, by Yibum, all you need is that you're not erased from history.
So what do you need for an ancestral line?
To be the father, right? And that's the standard, right? The ancestral line, you need to be the father. For Eved Ivri, right? For Eved, you need to be the father. To not need Yibum, you need to not be erased from existence, right? And that's a different standard, right? And again, the simplest one, the Rashba, based on the Gemara in Kedushin, the Gemara in Erech, all that, is that this teaches you that we have this principle, right? That a son is filling his father's place, and every other Yoresh, daughter included, because she doesn't inherit when there's a son, that proves that she's an Acher, right? That seems to be the simplest shot. That's what the Rashba, I think, is taking it. That the Tosfot is almost definitely taking it. That has Minchas Chinuch explicitly takes it, right? Yes, Ram.
I'm just thinking on a bit of a side note, like, I mean, just to explore the idea of, like, I don't know, like, the like, Acher versus, like, not Acher, like, what would, I don't know, like, how would they, grandson, is that word, like, paternal grandson?
So grandson's an interesting question, right? Because grandsons go through their father, and we haven't talked about Mishmosh yet, right?
Is that the same word?
No. Mishmosh.
Mishmosh.
Remember, we mentioned it briefly, which is, how do you understand that second order heirs inherit? Do they inherit directly, or what we call Yorish Beketer, right? Which is, a grandson inherits because his father inherits, and even his father is dead, he inherits through his father, right? Or is it that the grandson is directly related, right? We noted this by brothers, right? That it's the seeming Machlokes Ramban Rashbam. How do you understand that brothers inherit? Directly, horizontally, or vertically? Up to the father and then back down to the son. Again, it's a Machlokes, Ramban, Rashbam. It's a Machlokes. That's why I'm saying we haven't done Mishmosh. I hope we get to Mishmosh, but who knows, right? Meaning the notion of how does Yerusha work through second order Yerushim, right, is a very important question, right? But we haven't done it yet, right? We haven't done it.
I know that you didn't first in the Rosh Gemara, but
yeah.
In terms of our opinion, it seems that's a pretty good question if it was a woman who
Maybe we're right. We stopped in the Gemara and Erech had the question of daughter, Bat Ma'u Shatami.
But what if the daughter is doing it for her mother?
Well, right. I said that we're bracketing for a moment the question of mothers, because that is a discussion in the Gemara, but
Right, okay.
But we'll have to get it, right? We'll have to get there. But we haven't done that yet, right? But what I want you to note is that this is all assuming the Girsa that Rov Rishonim have and the explanation of Rov Rishonim, which is not shared by everyone. So there is a Rishon, which we only have in Kiddushin, or maybe we don't, because we don't know what else he wrote, because it's called the Shita Lo Noda Lemi, right? Shita Lo Noda Lemi. Yeah, we don't know who it's by. No, Lo Noda Lemi. So when I was in ninth grade, we were doing Kiddushin, and that is the Masechet on which you have the Shita Lo Noda Lemi. So at some point, and this is very classic, how many of you know Jeremy Litton? Do any of you know Jeremy? Litton. Yes. Anyways, Jeremy is like, he was 2 years older than me in Rambam. He was a character and a half. What? A character and a half, yeah. Maybe double character. I don't know. Right? It was interesting. He's a very funny person. You guys know Eli Roth? So Eli's cousin. Eli's first cousin. Okay? So one day Reziskin came into class. Reziskin, you know, right? Okay. So Reziskin came in and he said, "You're not going to believe this, but Jeremy Litton decided that since no one has taken credit for the Shita Lo Noda Lemi, he has taken credit, and he has decided that he has written the Shita Lo Noda Lemi." So Reziskin, his Arka Bagodesh, decided to play along with this, and for the rest of the year, whenever Jeremy would say a svara that went against what was in the Shita Lo Noda Lemi, he would raise a stira between Jeremy and his Sefer, and this became the running joke for like. It is good shtick. It's very, like, it's a very Reziskin shtick, and it's a very Jeremy Litton shtick, so it worked very well. Yeah, so anyway, so the Shita Lo Noda Lemi is exactly what it sounds like. Shita Lo Noda Lemi. We don't know whose position it is. It's somebody's. Right, but no, Lo Noda Lemi. Great. Look, there are a lot of Svarim that are like that, but we don't all call it that way. It's like the Sefer HaChinuch. We don't know who wrote the Sefer HaChinuch. We don't call it Shita L'Nit, we just call it the Sefer HaChinuch, and then everyone tries to figure out who wrote it. And then they say, oh, it's the Ra. No, it's not the Ra, is it? Or like Rav Haigo, the Bahag, right? Some people think it's Hudoigo, and some people will think it's... What? We call it the Baal Halachot Gedolah. It means the guy who wrote the Halachot Gedolah. Exactly. All right? Yes, he did write it. That is actually tautological, right? That is one of the most basic rules of logic, which is the rule of identity, right? He who wrote the Halachot Gedolah is he who wrote the Halachot Gedolah. Yes. Sure. Just like Shakespeare was really a woman. Okay, I mean, I have no idea, right? I have no idea. It could be. It wouldn't bother me, but what? Exactly. Yes. Except there's actually, but no. Right. Right. Chav Chaim is simply his eponymous work. It's a word you should know. Eponymous. Eponymous. It's the work for which you become, right, it becomes identified with your name. Right? Right, like he becomes known as the Chav Chaim, right? Even though he wrote other books like Mishnah Berurah, Rav Chesed, right? But Chav Chaim is his eponymous work. The one that
there was someone who wrote a book called Shabbos Goy and was concerned that was going to happen to him.
Shabbos Goy?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, Yaakov Katz did write a book called Shabbos Goy.
Yeah.
It's a good book too, but I don't think we know him as. I think we just know him as as Jacob Katz or Yaakov Katz. He was an excellent scholar, excellent. He wrote many works, but yes, Shabbos Goy was his most famous. Yeah. No, but the Chav Chaim actually had a name. Yisrael Meir Kagan, yes. Not just Kagan. Yisrael Meir. But yes. Eponymous is one of those helpful words. But Sefer HaChinuch, we have no idea who wrote, right? Meaning, people used to think it was the Ra'ah, but eventually evidence piled up that it's unlikely to be the Ra'ah. So then people have other theories.
What about something like the guarantee? That's the opposite. That was the work for the.
I mean, I guess that would be something like that. Yeah, sure.
That's the opposite. Though. That's the thing named after the person, not the person named after the thing.
Yeah. So. Yeah. There are a lot of these words. They're like very fancy words for it. What? Yes. I mean, there are other phrases, right? Like when. Right, if you're talking about a movie or something like, or a book where the main character, the book takes their name from the main character. There's a word for that, right? Yes. Like that character has a specific title. Yes. Do you know what the word? No, it's not, because it's the person for whom the title is taken.
Usually it's the main character.
That is also the case, but not in all books. Is the main character also the name of the book? That's fine, but there's actually a word. Do you know what the word is? That's the question. Do you know what the word is? You're trying to get out of it. Do you know what the word is?
No.
Oh, okay.
The main character is
it's really not a complicated word. It's complicated to pronounce because it doesn't sound like what you think it is, right? But the word is titular, which.
I've heard that term in other.
If you see it written, it's just title, right? It's when the show, right? Titular, right? Titular, right? But it means that, right? The titular character is the character for which the name derives. The book derives its name. The movie. What? That makes sense, right? So, like, yes, Harry Potter is the titular character.
So, if you have more than one titular character, like Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, I assume so. You know, I don't know what you would count something like, I don't know, Captain America or Iron Man, right? It's not their name, but it's their title. I have no idea.
That's their, like,
eponymous? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you'd use it. Okay, I don't think this really matters as a conversation. But now you have another word, 2 words. Look at that. Should we do this every day? We should do like what you did for the SATs. It's like... Right? It's like, do a word a day. Every day we'll start out here with, here's a word for you, eponymous, titular, Weltanschauung, right? Like, okay.
So, the game that...
Does ACT also have this?
What? Vocab words?
Yeah.
I
I mean, there's an English section and there's a read section.
You took the ACT or the? Yeah, it became much more popular after I left high school. Like people, like it used to be more, even in New York. It was always more popular in the Midwest. Right.
There's a game that Rami and I brought up in the context of like succession and stuff with like the different guys. So also in that most titles are associated with like a landmass, like a certain region, so like certain like counties, duchies, kingdoms, empires, etc. But titles that are like that exist independent of any particular area of that particular titles. That's why I know that.
All these vocabulary words you learned from that game you've been playing.
Yeah. Why would I know ultimate geniture?
What?
Ultimate geniture? Like, why would I know that word? Chemistry?
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about primogeniture, but that's because that's...
Ultimate geniture is...
That's inheritance by a Bachor. Only, exclusive. I think primogeniture refers only to exclusive inheritance by the Bachor. I think.
As long as it's either agnatic or agnatic.
But that you knew from like 4th grade, no? Didn't you all learn about primogeniture in 4th grade? I did. Right? No? Didn't you do that? Like primogeniture was like a word you learned in 4th grade.
No,
like this.
Well, not 4th grade. Like I knew like the Monarchs or whatever.
No, that was what they said. Like a lot of the people who moved to America from England were secondborns because England had a strict primogeniture. So only the firstborn would inherit, and therefore anyone who was not a firstborn and wanted to get land would move to the godforsaken country of America.
In 9th grade, like talking about like Charlemagne, the reason why the whole empire like fell apart was because they didn't have primogeniture. They had they had like
something other a church.
They used Catholic time. They had that. I don't think they used the word. They just said they like my teacher just said they didn't have primogeniture.
Okay. Okay, fine. Well, with that nice aside, now let's look at the Shita Lo Noda Lemi. So he says, the Efshar Lomar de Lahachi Lo Nokat Lenachala Mishum Debat Tochiach Shaben Kodem Lo Lenachala Va'afilu Hachi Oved Abat. Right? He says, and I don't know exactly what his girsa was here in the Gemara, right? But he says, maybe what you learn is that just because the ben inherits before you doesn't mean that you're an acher. Proof: the Eved Ivri does serve the daughter.
Wait, oh, really? I didn't know women could have male servants.
I didn't even give you that many sources today, man. This is the first line.
Also, Eved Ivri is another argument they use.
Right? Delo menatinen ela ach. And he says, V'chi tema minaluhu l'rabbanan de'oved rabban. Now again, most of the Rishonim either have the explicit gears in the Gemara or understand the Gemara that daughters are excluded. He says, how did the rabbis know that the Eved serves the daughter? Answer, V'yesh lomar mile de'inyan yibum benuvat yadadinu. Answer, Yibum. Which means that after all this, it may be that Rov Rishonim take the notion that Yibum is the exception, and it's more expansive, because Leimach Shema B'Yisrael and the like, but really a Bat is Nacher, but the Shita Lo Noda Lemi says, I mean, of course, we could have come up with funny shitas, right? Like, the Shita Lo Noda Lemi knew that his book would be anonymous, and therefore he could safely be a feminist, because no one could critique him. Now I've come up with an alternate history. Right? I highly doubt this is the case, but it makes Yaakov laugh. But
what if you argue that somehow just says people carry down legacy to a degree? I don't know how it would.
I don't know. But he doesn't seem to take that, right?
We say Yibum is different because it carries down legacy as for something like Yiyos, which is just something to inherit.
I don't know. Well, let's see what he says in the rest of the paragraph. He says, Legabe Eved Ivri nami benu bat ki adadi minu. V'lo nehira denehida benu bat shavim mishum limenu mashkam yadadinu ve'avagav de ben adam mi bat lenachala. Right? Aval heicha de adid l'mute ben l'revuye ach. Right? In a case where you come to exclude a son and include a brother, mishum de mikra echad marbe mikra echad mimayit. Vadai ben adif l'rabuyit fei me'ach. So then the son is definitely more than a brother. Shekin gam dachalav l'achal yada. V'ikasha halom adin achal ach. And it goes on, right? But sorry, the chen vergei shalchon. Let's read it to the end. Tamrin in the bed about shavan nachal. Came and Yibum ki adodininu, and he says, but wait a second, didn't the Gemara raise the possibility that sons and daughters were equivalent for nachala from Yibum, and then we rejected it? He said, but wait a second, maybe you'll tell me, doesn't stay achuza prove that this is not the case? Because he does have the gersa in the Gemara, that what? That a daughter cannot redeem the land. Right, he reads it more limited, which is that Se'el Chuzah is yet a higher standard, which is you can't even be an Acher compared to the Ben. Right? So the Shita Lanudami is a very weird read of this sugya. So he says, and we'd have to figure out what he means. Right? He thinks that in the end of the day, right? Unlike the Rajba and Tosfos and Chizkenu, who basically string these all together and say these all create the idea that a daughter is an acher in all circumstances, right? Except for Yibum, which is Xer Katuv, that all you need is Lo Yimachesh Mal B'Yisrael. He goes the opposite direction, which is there's the supreme Memali Makom, which is son, and for some reason by Stei Achuzah you need the supreme heir. But that doesn't mean that the bat is all the way down the list with regular Yarshim. She's not. Yibum and proves that a bat is not fully an acher. And therefore, this is his hierarchy. There's the person, right? Then there's Stei Achuzah, which requires the person and his absolute closest relative. But anyone who's even second to that heir doesn't do Stei Achuzah.
But why would Stei Achuzah be more strict than others?
Okay, well first let's just describe, then we'll try to explain. Right? He says that's step 2. Evan Ivri requires someone who's Mamali Mikomo, and doesn't need to be somebody who is supreme. It can be anyone who fills this place, which is Ben Ubat. What's the proof? Yibum, where son and daughters are together, unlike Repersh and whatever, who say that no, Yibum is different because it doesn't need a Mamali Mekomo, it just needs not Lo Yimachesh Mo. He says no, Yibum shows that a daughter is your proper Mamali Makom, and that's true, that's all you need for Eved Ivri, right, for Eved. And then there's all other Yarshim. So now Yaakov says, why? So I don't know. Now, it could be that this, I'll say that, well, I'm not sure about this, how to understand that she's telling me. On the one hand, you could read it just say that he disagrees with Pinchas-R.J. Namely, maybe what he thinks is that if there are no sons, the daughter would be able to redeem a Stei Achuzah. Right? And he understands the Gemara Erech not like the Pinchas-R.J, which is, if there are sons alive, then the daughter can't redeem it, simply because in practice there's actually someone higher up on the hierarchy for inheritance. But maybe he would disagree with him in Chizkenu and say that the Gemara Erechim is limited to a case where there are sons. Right? But if there weren't, and then why would you say Seth was in these higher standards? Does it? It's just that when there are actual sons, since the sons are the ones who in practice are going to inherit, so they have to be the ones to save the property from leaving the inheritance. But theoretically, he could read that Gemara saying, but if there are no sons and the daughters are the heirs, then they could redeem it. Right? Remember, the question we left with the Gemara and Erechim is it's not 100% clear whether the Gemara is saying, can daughters inherit when sons are alive and will be the heirs in practice? Right? Or does the fact that sons inherit when they're, right, first, make it that even when there are no sons, daughters are too far removed, so they can't. He doesn't say. So it could be that the Shita Lonuzlami says daughters really are the Mamali Makom. The only time that they can't redeem the Stei Achuzah is if there are actual brothers alive, because then in practice they're not the heirs. And if practice they're not the heirs, then they can't save the inheritance from being lost. Right? But in principle they could be. Right? Or, that's one model I could suggest with Shita L'mi. The other model is to say that Shita L'mi, he sees this as, right, he doesn't see this as a sharp line between Mamali Makom and not Mamali Makom. He thinks there's Yorshim who are far down the list, and then there are gradations of Mamali Makom, and for some reason, by Gzera Katuv, but you need the supreme Mamali Makom and not the slightly less Mamali Makom. I don't know, right? Those are the two models I have for Shita L'mi. I don't know what to tell you. Okay. Fine. I have two more points to make, and then we'll finish the discussion of daughters, okay? I gave you Reb David Povarsky on Kiddushin. He's like one of the classic yeshivish, like Rosh Yeshiva. You know, like there's these Rosh Yeshiva, sometimes you'll get in like more yeshivish svarim. They'll just say the Rosh Yeshiva say, and they mean that there's like a group of Rosh Yeshiva that they just sort of throw together that say similar lumdus. Right? So like if a bunch of them say it, then it just gets quoted as the Rosh Yeshiva. Reb David Povarsky is one of those. He's very, very good. So he, I think, just summarizes a lot of this, and so I just wanted to put it to sort of wrap up the sugya, and then I'm going to show you a surprising sheet in the Yad Ramah. Okay? So Rabbi David says like this: Hanirtza v'nimkar la'akum ein oved lo raben v'lo rabat. L'chora muchach mehachad ba'akum afa bet yoreshet. Right? So he said the simple understanding of our Gemara is that when it comes to non-Jews, daughters do inherit. Remember, we saw that as a machlokes rishonim, Rambam, Iri, Rashi. D'lochein katani shein oved lo raben v'lo rabat. V'chein mavur b'Rashi, and that's what your Rashi says. B'yavamot. V'zel l'shono. This is what Rashi says. B'nachriutan la b'nei din nachaloninu. When they are not Jewish, they can't inherit. Divat kiven u'mekor kipashut. Al-Yerusha nahagabahu. Sorry, right? So we said one of the potential nafkaminas is what about non-Jews? And Rashi holds, as we saw in some Rishonim already, that when it comes to non-Jews, daughters and sons inherit equally, right? Which makes it sound like, according to him, Ben Obat are Mamali Makom equally, and there's some Gzera Katuv that Ben comes first, or something like that. We said our Gemara doesn't sound that way. So she said, however, you could read our Gemara not that way and say that when it comes to Nakum, only a son would inherit, right? And we said that at some level this might hang on that. If you say sons inherit in all cultures but not daughters, then that makes it sound like son are the natural Mamali Makom and daughters are not. Right, but if you say that no, by non-Jews, sons and daughters both inherit, that already indicates that maybe they are equal heirs. Right, and maybe there are certain Gzera Katuv that limit it.
Sorry, there was something that I asked previously on the point, but that I just didn't actually get a real answer for. The concept of this means that if a Jew is owned by a non-Jew and then non-Jew dies, his son gets to apparently hold on to the Jewish life. But aren't we informed to not?
Yeah, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Does that even have any halachic status of the Jews act? The Jew has to be under the. Okay.
Yes, we make you buy. We force you to buy back, but it still works.
Well, but it's legal.
It works. Many things that are illegal work. Yes.
It's not like if the Jewish slave is threatened, is he obligated to protect himself?
These are very long sugyas. We're not doing avodim now. I'm glad you're fascinated, but you can look at those sugyas in Kiddushin, the first parak. Okay, then he quotes the Pri Yitzchak. Hevi divrei Rambam v'zel shono akum Yerusha of Torah Ziring-Yerusha of Daughters manichin adam lefi minhagam v'chadav v'magid Mishnah mibnei shelo matin zer nachal al Yisrael bilvad. So the Rambam had said that only the son, right? It sounds like only the son, and everyone else we let you do whatever you want, but the son is unique. V'chadav Pri Yitzchak sham di yesh lachkor bat gam ken yoresh Rav Kamovein. He says, what about a daughter? Oh, dabat, like a bakum. Maybe Raya, and he proved from our sugya that daughters are different. However, as we saw, we need the Miri cut the guy Yerush of the Shar Marisha. I know Cholik Rambam she cut the Shar Yerush Manichin Odam Lefi Minagam. I'm not certain. The name of the Akum Ben Abat Shaven Im Gain Im Yoresh Nami Shar Marisha Ye Nami Ben Ach Shaven. Okay, fine. One last shita, and this shita is very, very odd. Okay.
Shocking comment.
What? Shocking comments. They're shocking. How did you know I was going to say that? Yes. The Yad Ramah and Kuf Mem Tet has the following very bizarre shita. Who is the Yad Ramah? Ramah, not Ramah, with a hey, not an aleph. The Lech Adatov. Okay. Okay. Yes, Zuchid is last. Should we do that? One Hebrew word a day, one English word a day? Here, I'll teach you a Hebrew word that has been used many times over this weekend. I didn't know what it was when I first came to Israel, and then I saw it pretty much in the newspaper about every single thing that happens in this country, and that is siyut. Samach Yud Vav Tet. It means nightmare. Right? Okay? Right? Siyut is a nightmare. So you see it surprisingly often in the news, which is siyut. Right?
This is what we want to have on the video.
What?
This is what we wanted to have on the video.
Sure. I don't think it's audio. Yeah. So, okay. So fine. The last sheet, who's the Yad Ramah? Who's the Yad Ramah? Who's the Yad Ramah, Rami? Good, I asked you. Oh, Ezra, Yad Ramah. Good, who wrote it? Well, let's see. The Resh stands for?
Rabbi.
Very good. Rabbi, however you want to pronounce it. Good. Mem? Mayor. Very good. Hey?
Mayor Abulafia.
Mayor, so it's the hey? What's the hey? Halevi. Mayor Halevi Abulafia. Good. Very good. Yes, really. Mayor Halevi Turdus Abulafia. Yes, that sounds very much like a good Ashkenazi name. Very good.
Virgos and died in Toledo.
Thank you. Yes, he was funny. Very good. Okay.
Oh, his grandparents was Shlomo Levi Alkabitz. I've heard that name. Alkabitz.
The guy who wrote Lechadodi?
Yeah.
Okay, so Yad Ramah writes this in Kuf Mem Tet. He says, so I have to explain a little bit of the context, but basically there's a principle later on in the Masechet called Matanot Yochanan ben Broka, where certain Matanot, certain gifts can take on the status of Yerusha, right?
What?
Yes.
Okay, can we explain what that means?
Meaning, okay, I can't really get into this full figure right now, but the Gemara on Kuf Mem Tet has this. But basically, there are certain cases where I don't want to get into the whole thing yet, but whatever, he allows a certain amount of manipulation in terms of Yerusha, right? But only to Yorshim. Okay, can I leave it at that for now?
Okay.
Right, he allows a certain amount of manipulation of Yerusha, right, through Matanot, but only to Yorshim. Okay, is that clear? I'm going to leave that for the moment. Okay. So he says in that context, he says, so the question really he wants to know is whether these quasi-Yerusha gifts, which manipulate Yerusha, can they be given to daughters when sons are alive? Okay, so watch this very lumdish position. Here's the question. Yeah, wait. I have to formulate this because this is one of those things that you have to, it's hard to believe that such a shita exists. The question that he basically wants to deal with is, well, what does it depend on whether you can give these matanot to girls? Whether, when there are sons, the daughter is not an heiress, or she is an heiress who gets zero. Right? Meaning, how do you view her? Right? Is it that she... Right now, what's enough to me now, right? Because if you say that she's not an heiress, then you've proven that sons are more. But theoretically, you could say no. Even when there are sons, she is an heiress. She just happens to get zero.
Why would she happen to get zero?
She's second in Noah.
Yes, exactly. But she's still, and then you would explain the Yibum case in a very fancy way, which is, why does the daughter help for Yibum? Because she is a primary heiress. She just happens to get 0. But that doesn't matter for Yibum, because that's not about property. That's about legacy, and she is an heiress. So Yaakov is giving me this look, like, what in the name of God are you babbling? That's too lumdish to be true. I agree with you, but I just want to read the Ramah. I said shocking. I didn't say it made sense. Let me read it. Yeah. No, but it's relevant for correct, but it is relevant for Matanet Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Because if you think that you can only give this present to people who are Yarshim in practice, then it matters whether she's not Yoresh or a Yoresh who gets 0. That matters. Yes, this is an actual Rishon who said this craziness. I understand that it's crazy. I didn't say it wasn't crazy. I didn't make it up. Don't blame me. I didn't make it up. I repeat, not my fault. Fine? But Yad Ramah actually says this, and he says, even though if there are sons, right? None of them take all the Yerusha El Kol Chad V'Chad Yaresh Chulkei, but each of them takes his portion below owed. Not only that, are multiple sons all heirs at the same time. Ela she'ein levad b'makom ben klum, even though when there are sons, the daughter gets 0, so how can she get Yerusha, right? Matan, right? The case of Yochanan ben Broka. Afilu hachi ita levad b'matna shtiv meira. She can get a, right, this is a matana that happens at the time of death. It's called a matana shtiv meira. It has certain halacha, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka has its own twist on it. Okay? Yes and no. Meaning it's a matana that's given at the moment of death, right, and therefore doesn't need kinyan. Right? That's what it is. She says, a daughter can be given a matana shtiv meira at the time of death, even if there are sons alive. Shiny hatam, it's different there. The shame habanim et av achahi, because all the sons, with regards to their father, are the same. V'ki kamrin deleka dekatam lu begavei mishum Yerusha acheret kamrinan. The ilu meoto Hashem avagav the kol heicha dechi hadade ninu yardi gadadi. The kol heiche dehadade the kol heiche dadi v'madadi gon banim legabe banot kadme lahadadi kula chad Yerusha. Says they're all the same, and even though sons come first, in terms of being heirs, they are the same. They're equivalent. She just gets nothing. They're both heirs. She just gets nothing. But therefore, she is an heiress. So anything that is relevant for her being an heiress, besides for actually getting anything, she is like a son. Try that logic on precise. She is an heiress equal to the heir. She just gets an inheritance of 0.
I don't like the fact that she's equal.
But he says that Ki hadade, Chakula Chada Yerusha. It is one Yerusha. He says Huadin, and therefore he says Huadin Gavim Anash Temira. The Avakab the Kodum and the Kabel Inish Achem Gavim Mishem Echad. Heich in the Vijim Gavim. Matano Kevin the Kulu Ki hadade Nu Mishem Echad Kasu V'Chada Takante Lukulu Kol Chad V'Chanman the Yoav Lein Not in Ushakal. And that's why they all apply in the Allah with Manash Temira, because they're all heirs together. So he seems to think that daughters really are like sons. They just get 0. Technicality.
That seems to feed into that happening of the Gemara that we.
Yeah, I don't really know what to tell you, but this is in fact what the Yad Ramah seems to say halacha l'maisa. Is that what you learn is that daughters really are like sons. They just happen to get 0. Oh, too bad. But they're really the same. So therefore, you have a formulation that in Hanavi daughters are like sons.
They really sound like you're saying.
What? Yes, I know. Don't ask. Look, this is like one of those things you have to be so lumdish to come up with a position like that, right? It's like haloi shame.
In order to be called lumdish, we gotta have some logic there.
Ooh.
I don't know. Maybe Gemara says.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. What he says. I'll tell you. Look, Rami, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, fine. That is the end of what I want to say on this question of whether daughters are equivalent to sons. Tomorrow, what I want to deal with is, for me, a very important question, which is, despite the fact that the Gemara is painfully clear that sons inherit before daughters, and when there are sons, daughters don't inherit at all. In fact, the Torah says so. The minhag for hundreds and hundreds of years has been that daughters do inherit. That we trick the system to make sure the daughters inherit in various ways.
Well, if we go by the Yadarman, that would be in this year.
One second. Yeah. So we do that through all types of fascinating mechanisms, right? The most famous of them was, the name sounds a bit misogynist, so I don't know if people love it, but the original shtar was what was called a shtar chatzi zachar, which was, let's make a daughter like half a son, which was exactly what it sounds like. It was a document that used some legal fictions to make it that daughters inherited like half a boy, which eventually became a shtar kulo zachar, right? Which was a document that makes them the functional equivalent through fancy schmancy mechanisms.
Oh, so you just do the same process twice?
No, you do it once, but as cool. No, you don't do the same process twice. You do it once, but you change the amounts. So here's what my plan is the next 2 days, or next 2-3 days. But the next, right, is before we get to, I want to do like 1 day surveying all the mechanisms we use, right? One is this shtar chatzi zachar, shtar kulo zachar. There are other ones, meaning there's a big machloket haposkim whether you can just circumvent all of it by saying, well, we live in a society in which daughters inherit and therefore din malchus medina, right? This is an old machloket haposkim whether you're allowed to do that. Which now, what do you think that comes down to? Whether din malchusa applies to simply make it the daughters inherit without us having to do anything?
That is Darabanan or Daraisa?
Not Darabanan and Daraisa, but something else.
Is it like specifically going to make it?
Meaning, or others.
Is it her giving halacha or is it giving advice?
Meaning, or put it differently, is it giving a mitzvah or is it giving?
Just how it works.
Exactly, right? Meaning, in general, Dina Malchusa works by monetary law, but not by mitzvah. Right? So the question that I talked about all the way at the beginning, which is this a mitzvah, right? Or is the Torah just giving, right? That's going to come back, right? That seems to be part of what drives this question, right? So we'll get to that. But for me, there's a prior question. And that is, why? Meaning, in general, even when you can use, when it works to use loopholes, going back to Rami's problem before, which is, right, meaning, Rami has this problem, just because, right, how could it be that things work that we don't want them to happen? But the answer is, that happens all the time, right? And in addition to the question of whether something works, you have to ask, is it spiritually beneficial? Is it a good thing? Right? So, let's say you think that Mechirat Chametz works. There's a secondary question, which is, should you utilize it? Right? So there's a whole huge amount of literature as to under what circumstances are legal loopholes not just possible, in the sense that they actually technically work, but are they advisable spiritually? All types of things, right? Kruzbo, every type of loophole, right? Meaning Ilana Stein-Hain wrote her dissertation on this, right? Literally, her entire dissertation is on this point, is the use of harama in all of Chazal, right? When it's legitimate, when is it not, what circumstances, what are Chazal saying, one second, right? So, I'll take 1 second. The question I want to deal with first, which was in Machloket, I'm going to present as Machloket Rav Kook on one hand and Rav Herzog on the other, but it's not exclusively them. There are other people in this conversation. I think I also gave you the Chazon Ish, but you should understand it's a very, very huge Machloket. The question is as follows. In general, people are more likely to let you use a loophole if they think that the law in question is just a technicality and not like representative of a fundamental value. Right? Because if it's a fundamental value and you're circumventing it, even if it works, there's something wrong with you. Right? There's something wrong with you. So like, let's take Prozbul, right? There are some people who will say, look, Hillel made Prozbul because he knew that people weren't going to lend money. Right? And if you lent out, $100,000, right? So I understand you can't afford to let Shemitah wipe it away. So then maybe it's legitimate to utilize the loophole that is Prozbul. But let's say Rami was at a vending machine, and I'm behind him, and Rami is short a quarter, shekel, right? And that's the only loan that I have going to Shemitah. So a lot of folks will say, listen, don't write the prusbul so that you can go and demand that Rami pay you back the shekel. I mean, it'll work if you do it, right? But really, like, you don't need to do that. So be Mekayim mitzvah. Shemitah tzafim, shirto kamashma. So Rav Kook and Rav Herzog, as we'll see, has a machlokas, which is, okay, when the Torah said the daughters don't inherit, why did it say that? Did it say that because it really believed there's a fundamental value at stake that boys should inherit and not girls? And girls are like a last resort if there are no sons? If that's the case, then it's wrong for us to look for loopholes. Even if they work, it's wrong religiously for us to look for loopholes. Or do you say, no, it's totally fine. The Torah didn't have a principled opposition. It just didn't let them inherit. Now, you'll tell me that sounds weird. If it didn't have a principled opposition, then why didn't? Right? So then, right, Rav Herzog, as we'll see, will take that position, is going to say, well, let me show you. Right? Let me show you a stream of thought from Chazal to the Rishonim to believe that sons inheriting and not daughters was reflective of a certain economic reality in which the best way to take care of daughters wasn't inheritance, it was other mechanisms. But therefore, if the reality is such that the best way to take care of them is inheritance, it's not against the spirit of the law. You just have to deal with the technicalities. For me, that's a very important question before you get to the question, how do we circumvent the law, which is, do we want to, right? So that's what we're going to do tomorrow, okay? You're going to complain, it's 2 pages of Makaros. This question animates almost an entire volume in Rav Herzog's book of Pinchas-R.J. Yerusha takes up the whole volume, and just Yerusha of Daughters takes up like 4 chapters, right? You probably won't be surprised which side of the equation to come up on because, you know, as I've already told you, as much as I love Rav Kook, I don't know if I always understand him, as opposed to Rav Herzog, who is like my rabbinic hero. I love Rav Herzog. I'm obsessed with Rav Herzog. And everything Rav Herzog did, I think Rav Herzog was like just the coolest person ever. So you probably won't be surprised that my sympathies will lie with Rav Herzog. Yaakov's sympathies will definitely lie with Rav Herzog. Rav Herzog, you know, I just love Rav Herzog. But like his approach to like law, his approach to science and Torah, you know, like everything about Rav Herzog, like his PhD was like the basis for coming up with the modern Chela. Is, you know, not only did he have a PhD, but like he didn't even have a PhD in like Jewish studies, which I have nothing opposed to that, but he had a PhD in like chemistry, and he just happened to do it on. Yeah, he was cool. Herzog was really cool. Herzog was really super cool. Like I just love Herzog. He's awesome. Yes, Ezra, you get the last word.
Just about Rami's thing, like a lot of things that are usher, they can't be usher if you're presentation and they don't exist. Like certain things. Like,
correct.
So like you can't. Like,
yeah, that was my smicha bechina.
It's usher to kidnap someone.
Yes, that was my smicha bechina. Yes, that's a fascinating sugya from Tmura Dav Daled to Tmura Dav Vav, which is Kol Milta Damer Rahmana Lo Ta'avid, Avid Mahani, Avid Lo Mahani. And Machloket Abaye and Rava, whether whenever the Torah said don't do something, does that mean don't do it, but if you do it, it'll work? Or don't do it, and if you do it, it won't work? The amazing thing about that sugya is that by the end of the sugya, there is almost no difference. Because for almost every case in Kol HaTorah Kula, either Rava or Abaye have exered HaKatuv to end up agreeing with the opposite position. There's only like 1 or 2 cases in Kol HaTorah Kula where there's any nafkamina to this. But for a long time, for those of you who are thinking why is smicha, it's probably still true. They try to give you a bechina on a Gemara that they assume you haven't seen. So they pick 3 Gemaras scattered from throughout Masechta that people don't normally learn, and they give it to you as your smicha bechina. The problem is, everybody knows that it's the exact same 3 Gemaras. It's Dav Daled Dav Hey Vav in Tmura, and it's I think at some point it was Daf Chav Gimel in Nazir. It's the exact same Gemaras every time, right? And like, you know, even if you haven't gone through all of Shas, right? You just need to know that it's the same Gemaras that they assume you don't know, right? One year they tried to switch it up and they made you read the Tosfos on the first Daf of Nida. I remember the year they did that. It was not my year of Bechina, and I remember a bunch of guys panicking and running over to me, like, Ziring, I can't read this Tosfos. I'm like, yeah, that's why they picked it. It's misery. The Tosfos of the first Daf of Nida are impossible. They are unbelievably difficult. So that's a better test. If you could read the Tosfos on the first Daf of Nida, then you deserve to be in Smicha.
Right, was it like just on the test, it was something different?
It's an oral Bechina.
Oh,
It's an oral Bechina where they test your reading and conceptualization skills. But like, really, like, he was like, pop quiz, you have an hour to prepare Surah Daf Dalet. I'm like, oh no, I am shocked. No, it can't be. Yeah, that was pretty easy.